Welcome back to another episode of the Return of the Roar podcast on Sactown Sports 1140. My name is Brenden Nunes. Got coworker Frankie Cartoscelli here with me. How you doing, Frank?
Brenden, sir, I'm great. It's pretty funny. Do we want to give some backstory about our guest and who we're having on
Feel
today?
free.
And why? No, why don't you tell us? Why don't you tell us the story real quick about why we have our guest on today?
Yeah, that would definitely be on me. We have Hunter Patterson of The Athletic here, covers the Kings and does a handful of other things for that great site over there. We did this exact episode and we changed the questions a little bit since a week ago. And literally 5 minutes after we finished it, I managed to delete the recording. So that one is not to be seen. I thought it was a great episode for what it's worth. Yeah, I was happy.
The lost episode. It's not the lost episode of Return of the Roar.
Yeah, I've done a good, several hundred podcast episodes, and I think this is maybe the second one I've ever lost. So definitely a little disappointed in myself, but happens. So, it is what it is. Appreciate you, Hunter, for joining us again, or as far as listeners are concerned, for the first time. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be back with y'all. It was fun the first time around, and I think it'll be fun again. So.
Hey man, we were just getting warmed up. It's our own training camp here. We had to kind of go through it, and I think that was Brenden just kind of testing us a little bit, kind of keeping us on our toes and making sure that we're ready to go for our own media day next week. So hey man, tip of the cap.
Yeah, it was intentional. I had a plan all along. I actually wasn't a fan of my take saying that the Suns are going to make the Western Conference Finals, so I decided to just totally scrap it. Is where we went with that.
Why would you walk? You're walking that back already?
No, I'm not walking it back. I'm just joking around.
Okay, I was gonna say, come on, man, nothing's changed.
So that's on me. But we're back, I guess, here for the first time, like I said, for listener wise. And Hunter, I'm gonna throw the first question to you, just like we did last time. We haven't gotten your opinion for listeners on the DeMar DeRozan addition to the Sacramento Kings. Just kind of first reaction when you heard that happen. What do you think are the pros to it? And then some potential questions that exist there.
I was surprised. I think initially there were talks, as we mentioned, of Kuz, possibly Brandon Ingram. And so DeMar wasn't really someone I had thought about initially. And once his name was involved with the Kings and trades and signing trades and different scenarios, I was like, okay, this could be nice because obviously you have a scorer who can get his own bucket in De'Aaron and Malik off the bench, and then you have them together late in games. But DeMar obviously has done this for years. He's sustained success for a while in the league, and he seems to really key in late game moments. So I was excited for them. I thought that would be a great addition, and I have seen people talk about spacing and how it may be a bit clogged with not as many 3-point shooters. Well, DeMar just isn't as much of a 3-point shooter as you may like. So I'm more optimistic than that. I'm not really too hung up on the spacing. I think they'll figure it out between all the great basketball minds on the team and Mike Brown at the helm.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely a 6-time All-Star. I think he's 36th, 37th, somewhere around there, an all-time points scored in the NBA. He's right under Steph Curry, which I didn't realize until yesterday, day before, so that they're in the same draft class. So the fact that DeMar is right there next to Steph is pretty wild. Steph got a little bit of a later, not start, but came around and really became the Steph that we kind of all know today later in his career, right around the age that De'Aaron is at now, for what it's worth, signed to the same company there. And I think that, De'Aaron is an interesting topic to me here. Obviously, like kind of the big three that the Kings have now is De'Aaron Fox, DeMar DeRozan, Domantas Sabonis. And to me, going into what is essentially a contract year for De'Aaron, still has years left on his contract. But if he were to make an all-NBA team, that he would be eligible for the supermax extension. Now, from a Kings fan perspective, maybe you don't want the books to have a supermax on it, but ultimately, if he deserves it, then he's going to get it, and it would be from Sacramento. In my mind, that's how that would go. And you need one of the best players. You need the best player on the floor in a playoff series, I think, on at least 3 of the nights. And then maybe you have a random fourth one where Kelly Olynyk or Grant Williams decides to go crazy, as I throw out 2 Celtics examples. But Frank,
Also,
what do
Heat
you
legend.
Heat
Kelly
legend?
Olynyk.
That's very true. Canadian legend too.
Yep.
Just can't get out of the way over there. What do you think, Frank, could be that next step to De'Aaron Fox's game? And do you put any stock into what I was just talking about with his supermax eligibility?
Yeah, my uncle loves telling me, like, we talk baseball mostly, and obviously baseball contracts are just insane. And I always kind of like will sweat some Yankee deals, and he always tell me the same thing, like, it's not your money. And I think from a fan perspective, that's kind of a way to look at it. Like, you want to retain talent and you want teams to spend money. The teams that spend money more times than not usually are the ones that are, playing later into the season. So I think from that standpoint, I think adding DeRozan was kind of a move that Brenden, you and I talked about it a lot too this season. Who was a player that the Kings could bring in that could not be a max player? Because I think the NBA has some new rules or stipulations with max deals under the new CBA. So you already have 2 max guys De'Aaron on a max, I think right now, then on their max, Sabonis on a max. Who can be a guy that can come in and kind of bridge that gap to when Keegan Murray signs his new deal? DeRozan. But with that, De'Aaron Fox will need to prove he's a super max guy. And I think one of the main things we need to see from him in order to make him fit that mold is to knock down the 3 ball. That's been, I think, an Achilles heel for De'Aaron since he was in college at Kentucky. Really, I think people kind of highlighted the fact that he's an explosive guard that can get into the lane. He can get to the basket. He can draw fouls, knock down the mid range. But the 3 shot has never really been a positive for him. Last year, obviously, 37% from 3. The most made 3-pointers in his career. He really took a step forward on that regard. And also on the defensive end, another aspect of his game that I think needed to be improved to be a guy that you can look at as a super max guard. You don't want a guard that can just play one side of the ball. As good as he is on offense, the Kings need stoppers. And De'Aaron last year led the NBA in steals and steals per game. He was tied with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who obviously was in the MVP race. But I think just from Fox, I want to continue to see that two-way dynamic. And the durability. I think that he's been largely available. I think that he kind of got into a back and forth with a fan on Twitter this offseason about, I think there was a fan that called him injury risk or injury plagued. And he kind of highlighted like, hey man, like I played like an average of 70 games, I think, or if you don't count or if you kind of scale it back, because there were a couple of years where there's 72 game seasons. I think he's played in like 78 or 80% of games over the past 4 or 5 years. So being available is huge for him. And I think that's also going to be a big, obvious. That's also another thing that kind of matters is how many games play. I think it's a 63 game minimum. Is it 63 or 65 games minimum to win? I
think it's 65.
65. So hitting that mark, being a good two-way presence is going to be huge. But the consistency's been there for him, in my opinion. I think that every player in every sport is going to have spurts where they go through up and down stretches. And De'Aaron has proven he can kind of snap out of those cold stretches, come back in and be impactful. So really just continuing to be what he was last year, I think, on a winning team could make the difference. And I know for the YouTube people, my dog is popping up and down behind me. And that's what that is on my shoulder. So
can I also say for the YouTube people, Frank, you're a big Office fan. And
yes.
That TV is taking me back to an episode, man.
Dude, it looks better for the audio only people. It's sorry, but this TV, it's a 30-inch TV. It doesn't look that small when the bed. It's to scale. It works. But we said the same thing. My soon-to-be wife, excuse me, I almost called her my girlfriend. My soon-to-be wife and I are huge Office people. And we said the same thing yesterday. It's like we might need to put some stuff around the TV because it's looking a little bare. But I can stand there and watch TV all day. Stand there and watch all day. Michael Scott.
Fair enough. Hunter, what I'll throw to you, or first, I've kind of talked with some people within the Kings a little bit about De'Aaron, and I think that one of the things this year is just getting him back to the rim a little bit more. They're happy, I would imagine, with the improvement from 3, but I think there were instances where he was settling a little bit. And when it comes down to it, like his superpower, his best skill is his finishing around the rim. And obviously the speed goes hand in hand with that. But like last year was the lowest percent of his shot attempts being in the paint. It was 19%. Like you go year by year prior to that, 24, 29, 33, 42, 38, even 32 in his rookie year. So I think the idea is to get him back to the rim a little bit more, like maybe 6-7 threes a game at a good clip. If he's really rolling, get to double digits. If you're feeling it, they're going down. Like we saw some games that happened that way last year. But how do you think, Hunter, that DeMar factors into this? Do you think that he helps De'Aaron, or how does this sort of balance work in your mind?
I think he's going to be a great presence there, even outside of just what he brings on the court. And I think we see it now with he's kind of doing almost essentially a book tour where going on different podcasts and radio shows and things and promoting his book, kind of destigmatizing mental health in sports. And so just the life experience he brings away from the X's and O's, I think will probably be the biggest thing for De'Aaron and the rest of the team. Um, but I see him being someone who could probably encourage De'Aaron sometimes where it's like, okay, I think we've all seen it at games where De'Aaron seems to settle a bit, or he's had a few games where he's been pretty efficient from three, so he's kind of like trying to carry that over, which makes sense. But if it's not falling, he kind of relies on it sometimes too much when he is arguably the fastest person in the league currently and can get by any defender and is really crafty around the rim. So I think DeMar may be able more than X's and O's again, kind of just to like reel him in and be like, man, you got to like keep attacking and putting pressure on the rim. But I'm sure once again, Mike can probably. Um, I'm sure there's some schemes and DHOs that they'll figure out to kind of free De'Aaron up and get him downhill. One of my favorite sets actually is the like the high horns where maybe they can put DeMar in one of those situations and like he flares out a little bit. However you kind of can take advantage of matchups, I think that may be a set that they could use as well.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what teams decide to put their best defender on De'Aaron compared to DeMar. It might be game-to-game basis, depends on the size of the defender, but last year you'd see Jaylen McDaniels on De'Aaron Fox. Is that going to be the case, or is it going to be, Ant this next year? Or I mean, Minnesota may be a bad example because they have a crazy amount of defenders. Nikhil Alexander-Walker sitting right there too. But I think it could make De'Aaron see some different looks in that aspect. And then, Frankie, I'll ask you, when it comes to Domas, he's as my mic decides to fall on me, like I swear it loves to all the time.
You just told me you're going to get a new one before we started recording.
That's exactly why.
There it is, betraying you.
Yeah. We just saw Domas on I guess it's not a red carpet. They made it like brown, look like a court, I guess. Maybe brown's the wrong word, tan or whatever for the starting
hardwood?
five.
It was like
hardwood? It was still a carpet, but it was like supposed to look like a court, I guess. Right? Like it had the lines of a court, but it was still carpet, I guess.
I'm surprised that Netflix kind of just fumbled. I mean, if anyone needs a red carpet, it should be Netflix, but
That's a good point. That is a good point.
I digress.
I always think of go ahead.
Quick little thing. Shout out to she's like a sister to me and has been since high school. Vana, she's really talented and was a producer and helped out in the making of that. So shout out to her. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Did she peel back the curtain at all and let you know how much of it's going to be? Is it going to be like 80%, LeBron, like 20% everybody else, or?
No, she didn't really say too much. Periodically, she would just ask questions about who someone is, and it wasn't like I couldn't be too involved and know too much. So she didn't really say much.
Gotcha.
Last episode, he told us all the details, just so you know.
Yeah, just unpacked everything.
Yeah. I wonder what happens. I wonder how it ends.
Yeah. It is produced by Uninterrupted, Braun's company. And then I think it's also Omaha Productions, the Peyton Manning, and then the Obamas have a production company as well that's slipping off the top of my mind. That it's all three of them combined. So I'm kind of interested to see how that goes.
Well, did you guys watch Receiver or Quarterback? Because I only watched a little bit of those shows.
I watched most of it.
People say they liked Quarterback a lot. I think it was more mixed on a Receiver, but I think Quarterback was like a hit.
It was pretty good.
Pretty good. Okay. Well, obviously, I'm gonna watch the hell out of this one because we're basketball guys, but maybe that's the reason. I don't know. Kirk Cousins was a tough sell for me, but we'll see. Maybe I can dive back into it. I'll try to dive back into it.
You didn't like hearing about his wife shopping for him?
No, I think that's when I turned it off. But also, Chris Watkins, our buddy here at 1140. I mean, he was very back and forth on Kirk Cousins. I think he compared Harrison Barnes to. I think he called Harrison Barnes the Kirk Cousins of the NBA when HB was still playing here. So Chris kind of just planted those seeds in my mind of Kirk Cousins being someone I wasn't going to be drawn to. So
If Chris is comparing someone to Harrison Barnes, just so people know, it's not a compliment. Usually,
It's
is
not.
what we'll say.
It's not
he
good.
has things he can do well, but it's jack of all, master of none sort of thing.
Yeah, I think Chris was more happy about the fact that HB was traded than DeRozan was acquired when we were on Media Row, because we were at Summer League when that happened. I think Chris was more focusing on that part. So
that definitely could make sense. But Frank, like I'm always looking at De'Aaron as that one to take the next step, and we could talk about Keegan there as well. I think there's different guys to look at, but Domas is practically the same age as De'Aaron. Am I wrong for thinking that they're not being super optimistic about Domas necessarily taking another leap in his game?
I mean, in my mind, I think if he wants to earn that respect from others around the league, I mean, we know that Kings fans respect and value what DeMar DeRozan, obviously, what Domantas Sabonis can do on a nightly basis. But I think the biggest thing with Domas is he's got to make that mid-range shot at the very least, in not automatic, but just a positive, because we've seen him shy away from taking those shots time and time again. I think he's more comfortable on the baseline. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I think that he's found more comfort in that 10 to 15 foot baseline jumper. But those elbow jumpers, the 3-point shot, the numbers reflect that he was a decent 3-point shooter last year, but on super low volume. I think he took about 1 or maybe 1.1 per game last year at 38%, I think, around that range. He needs to be able to develop that aspect of he needs to be able to impact the game more than just inside of the paint. As great of a rebounder as he is, and he's averaged, I think, 13.5 rebounds over the past 2 seasons combined, back-to-back rebounding titles. He helps the Kings that way. There's no denying that. On the offensive end, he can run the offense out of the post, on the break, things that not many people taller than 6'4" can do. Usually, a guy that's in that spot as a point guard or a floor general. He is the Kings floor general. He's the guy that sets up the offense. He makes it work in all aspects, but we saw it mostly in the Golden State series, which people love to go back to when they talk about Domantas Sabonis. It was mentioned throughout the entirety of last year from outside markets or people that we talked to that cover, other teams. That was the biggest problem, was that it was center stage in front of everybody. Shied away from taking mid-range shots, got dominated against bigger, more physical bigs. I didn't see that as much of a problem last year. I think Domas actually played very well against bigs that are more physical, but it still wasn't, the shot wasn't there. We weren't seeing him take that consistently or knocking it down consistently. So for a guy that has, I think, 4 more years on his contract and is 27 years old, 20, or maybe just turned 28, yeah, you'd like to see him develop and be able to improve, and not look at him as that, a very high level 2-dimensional player, someone who can rebound and facilitate, but someone who can also be a player that can go and get you 25, 30 points if opposing defenses give it to him. Because right now, if he's not getting a clear lane to the basket or kind of cleaning up around the rim, he's not able to make as much of an impact on offense. So I think that for sure, we talk about De'Aaron making those adjustments. Can Keegan Murray grow from being a C option into a B option? Can Domantas Sabonis become a player who can knock down that mid-range and cause opposing defenses to push some of their frontline players up on defense and kind of open up the paint a little bit?
Oh, that's a little mute button there, Hunter.
Not bad, yeah. I was going to say, to that point too, I think Domas, just specifically, he has good feet. I think he's smart with how he moves and crafty, good footwork and everything, but it's slow sometimes. So I wish there was a way for him to kind of like speed his foot speed up, I guess, if you will, because he just seems he is, like I said, crafty and very smart with the moves he makes, but sometimes it can feel slow and predictable with the spin move and different things. So
yeah, and to be clear on my end, like it's not like I think that Domas needs to take another step necessarily. I just have more faith in De'Aaron because I feel like we've seen that year-to-year progress. Like you look at the year prior compared to last year, and you saw that growth for De'Aaron. And I think for Domas, like the shooting thing that Frank mentions, I thought that was most apparent in the Golden State series. And then the beginning of last year, it was like, oh, it looks like he's shooting a little bit more. Like 15 games into the season, it was like, all right, this is the same guy again, but that's not a bad thing. I think his biggest skill is that he makes everybody else around him better. And so like De'Aaron's growth and progress can in a way be credited to Domas. And I'm curious to see how that functions with DeMar DeRozan. I think Malik Monk falls into the same category there. But one thing that I do want to carry over from our last episode because I thought we had some interesting answers. Is biggest X factor going into the season, and you guys could shout out too because last time we also did a little bit of like a most surprising player, and I think it kind of falls into the same, and we gave varying answers between the two. So Hunter, we could start with you. What do you think is one or two guys that could be an X factor for this Kings team coming into the year?
I'm glad we get two now because, like you said, I think each of us were kind of going back and forth. But Kevin Herter, right off the bat, is someone who I think will be a huge X factor for this team because last season he kind of fell from grace a little bit. He had one of his best seasons his first year in SAC and regressed a bit. And so I think people are not sure what to expect. He's coming off of an injury and he's someone who definitely wears his emotions on his sleeve, which I appreciate as someone who, like we're around the team and we get to interact with him because he's not going to really hide much in terms of how he feels. And I think by now the team is aware of that. Coach Mike Brown is aware of that. And so it'll just be interesting to see kind of like how he bounces back. I think he'll have a bit of a chip on his shoulder and play with something to prove. So Herder is my one A option. My one B would be Keegan, of course, just because you're adding someone who's a first option on pretty much every stop he's been at in the league. And now he's going to mesh with De'Aaron. We'll see how that goes. And that pushes Keegan, unfortunately, further down the totem pole in terms of looks offensively. And I would hope that this would be the third-year leap for him. This would be an opportunity for him to continue to grow and show that he's more than just a shooter, a good two-way guy. But it could be challenging for him because his role wasn't super defined. He was in the process of defining it, and now it becomes a bit more murky for him. But I think they'll put. I seem to have a positive spin on everything. I don't mean to always be overly optimistic, but I do genuinely think they'll figure that out for Keegan.
Luckily, this isn't like 3 years ago, and you actually can put an optimistic spin on things. So,
right. There you go.
Yeah,
it's fair enough.
Don't remind me of when Chris and I had to record these pods going into a season, man. Just after 26 win seasons, these are great conversations we're having. But
can I real quick? Actually, I've been playing 2K a little bit in my career, right? And I'm in year 2, right? And I'm not on the.
Oh, you've been
for what
hooping.
it's worth. Well, I'm only like playing. I played like 8 games in the year. They gave me like key games. Played some of the postseason, elimination games, things like that. So I'm just trying to grind out. I got to get up to 99 eventually. But I'm not on the Kings because I was a point guard. Admittedly, I just wanted to throw lobs to Wemby. So, and I got to get HB and CP3 a ring. So, but the Kings, hilariously, were very Kings in that game. In the offseason, it says that Lauri Markkanen went from Sacramento to Utah, meaning that the Kings traded for him in the middle of the year, and then he went back to Utah
as a free agent.
Oh my god! And I played them again in year 2, and they have Marvin Bagley on the team, and I was like, "This is the most Kings thing I've ever seen in my life." So
what?
Just threw me back a little bit there. Sorry to derail, but Frank,
no,
Go ahead.
Real quick, we'll get to the X factor, but I'll ask you one more time. I mean, temperature check after a couple weeks. Is 2K is it worth getting this year? I still have not gotten it.
Great question. Neither have I.
No, we have Matt, George, and I have been playing a lot, and I'm typically like a my team player, but I got into my career this year, and this is the first time I've actually had like buddies that play it as well. And so I will say that playing with Matt, and we just talked to Chris into finally getting it over the course of this week, it's been a good time. And just saying, we only need 2 more for a 5 stack. So, if you guys want to hop in and, we're kind of the Kings, we need some wings out here.
Is it cross platform?
It is.
Okay. Hunter, what do you have? PS5, Xbox?
Yeah, I'm a PS5 guy.
I'm a PS5 guy.
But
I'm
planning to do it.
Okay.
I want to get it.
If you do it, Hunter, I'll do it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'll text you. I'll text you and let you know.
Text me because
Chris would be proud of me.
I've not to get too off track. I'll wrap it up. I'm just not to rant. I think a lot of people feel the same way about 2K. It's like the same game, just changing the year, and it's just I don't know. I usually just bought it anyway, but this year I kind of was like I don't know. But You know,
It's fair. I was the
if
same way, but I just never had like a group to really play with, and I've enjoyed it in that way.
All right. Maybe I'll scoop it up. But X factors, I think, kind of to piggyback off what Hunter said, and even what like Pat Bev said on a podcast recently, I think that Kevin Huerter is for sure that kind of that primary X factor for the Kings, because I think that the down year has soured not all, but some people on Kevin Huerter's ability to be an impactful presence on the floor. And that first year in Sacramento, 22-23, when they went to the playoffs, he was great. But like we talked about last week on the last episode, he's kind of a player that's been up and down, very streaky. I think his splits for each month. His first year here were literally every other month he had a good month. I think last year it was more front loaded. He had a very good opening month and then kind of regressed back into a role where we saw Mike Brown tinker with starting lineups and whatnot. So can he be a player that, one, can learn how to play off of the bench? Because it looks like he will be in that role, just because number one, he's not ready to be playing in preseason because that shoulder injury. We heard he'll be reevaluated in mid-October. Kings beginning preseason on October 9th. So I'd imagine a week after that first game, we'll hear if he's going to be on the court doing full contact or participating in practices or what have you. And then number two is the defense. We've talked about countless times, either on this podcast, on the air, on other podcasts, that Kevin Huerter has been a liability for the Kings on defense. He gets searched and hunted on double teams and switches. We've seen the Kings fall down 8-2, 10-2 in the first quarter because teams have successfully targeted him on those switches and gone on little runs and caused Mike Brown to have to adapt and make an early call for Malik Monk. So can Kevin Huerter be a player that can hold his own on the defensive end? Can he be someone that can learn how to play in a bench role next to Malik Monk, which also could be interesting? But I've come around to the idea that could possibly work because Malik's really been more of a distributor in Sacramento. Like, sure, he can go and get you a bucket and be a guy that can be like a microwave and get you 25, 30 points, but also a player that can get you 5, 6, 7, 8 assists. I think he was actually in the double digits a couple of times last year. So Kevin Huerter is my main X factor. And I think if we're having two, I've kind of changed my mind. I think last week, Keegan Murray goes without saying, a lot of expectations on him. I think we'll talk about him a lot going forward, but Jordan McLaughlin's someone who is probably going to get some minutes to begin the year. I think that Devin Carter, I think Devin Carter is someone the Kings definitely want to, they look at him as a building block. I think that they have a high regard of a high level of faith in him that he's going to pan out because he's kind of the player we looked at when Davion Mitchell was drafted, but with more of a wingspan and someone who could probably be more on the offensive end. But I think until he returns, which may or may not be in January, February, yeah, you could shorten the bench and go with Malik Monk as the backup point guard spot, which a lot of fans have screamed at me on Twitter that Malik's a backup point guard. Yeah, I think he can be, but I don't think they got Jordan McLaughlin just to stash him on the bench and not play him. He's someone that has one of the highest assist to turnover ratios in the league right now, and someone who is a good defender. He's a plus defender. He was in Minnesota because their system, you had to play defense to see the floor. So I'm looking at him as someone that maybe he'll play 10, 15 minutes a night, but if he can be impactful next to Malik Monk, Kevin Huerter, Trey Lyles in the second unit, that changes to me the way we look at the second unit. Yeah, they have issues with length and they're going to need to upgrade some spots at some point and kind of get more of those forwards that can defend at a higher level. But from an offensive standpoint and even, a light defensive standpoint, Trey Lyles can hold his own against some matchups. Having Jordan McLaughlin be there as a head of the snake at the second unit maybe could be a good thing.
Yeah, I think he's somebody, like you mentioned, the assist to turnover a little bit. Like he's somebody you kind of know what you're getting more often than not. And I think the Kings starting lineups have been pretty good in previous years. It just can vary a little bit as you go to that bench. Like I know, Hunter, you're a big Davion guy. He has his moments. There was some inconsistencies there. I will say, like, you don't necessarily know what you're getting night to night. I may have a Trust Your Work shirt somewhere in my closet over there.
Does Hunter have one, though?
I don't. I didn't even know you could get that on the shirt, to be honest.
It's super basic, to be honest. Like we could just make you one,
Okay, yeah. Well, I'll check him out, support some merch.
Yeah, for sure. Some of that. Just get one of those Raptors jerseys with Vince on it, Put a Davion version.
That's a great
It's not bad. It's not bad.
Yeah.
But I think getting a little bit of consistency from that backup role could be helpful for sure.
And I was going to say, kind of, it's funny they have the same name, but Jordan Ford and Jordan McLaughlin to me are similar in the fact that you put them on the court and you usually feel comfortable on both sides, and what they bring pretty consistent. Like you said, you know what you're getting. They're not going to try to step outside of their role too much unless I guess they're asked to. So that was a great pick, I thought, Frank.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate it. No, I think that. Well, I think literally it was the night they acquired DeRozan. I think Brenden, we were at Tipsy Putt after the game, and that I think Sean, our good pal Sean Cunningham, broke the news, and kind of a footnote at the end of that DeRozan kind of just tidal wave of an update. Kings also signed Jordan McLaughlin, which I think that I had to kind of look back at it. He's been a player for Minnesota. He didn't play much in the postseason because they obviously shortened the rotation, but I think he's their backup guard day one, and we'll see how Mike Brown does his rotations. But it just makes too much sense for me. He seems like a Mike Brown guy, and I do think when we look at what the Kings have had some issues with, and taking care of the basketball at times, that's someone you don't really need to worry about ever. Like, he's not going to try to make that errant pass or that risky move. He's going to be very calculated and smart with the basketball, and someone who can let Malik Monk have a little more time off ball to go get buckets. And that could also affect Kevin Huerter. Does Kevin Huerter turn into a spot up kind of floating shooter at that point? We'll see. But Malik Monk, yeah, he can be someone that can be a backup point guard, but you have someone also on the roster who can take care of the basketball arguably as well as anybody in the league. So
yeah, I'm interested to see how it goes. I wonder if it's an every night thing, or if, like, Coach talked about Keon kind of being a point guard a little bit at times last year, or like you mentioned, Malik Monk, I think fits that really well. We typically don't see him running the traditional one all that often. I would guess that probably has to do with defending the opposing one as well. But it'll be interesting to see how they manage all these guards. I think for my X factors, I kind of mentioned it earlier. I think this could be a really big year for De'Aaron Fox. And I think that him taking a big step in his game, probably close to the same level as Keegan Murray, is one of the biggest things that could happen for this team. Because the next step for De'Aaron is, you're locked into that all NBA spot. And we're talking about having a guy that, probably not competing for a starter on the All-Star team, because there's a decent amount of fan vote in there as well. But he's not far off from being one of the best players in the league, or outside of that, probably top 5-7 tier that just seems pretty impossible to crack into. But I think that he's there. I think that we've seen the steps, like I mentioned, going into what becomes a supermax eligible sort of contract year in that aspect. And I think the other guys you guys shouted out as well are great. Obviously, Kevin Huerter, I think definitely an X factor for this team. Interested to see how he comes back from injury. Keegan, obviously. I think that if Devin Carter gets to play, which is a big if, that this guy could be one of them, one of those X factors. I love what he brings on the defensive end of the floor. He just seems like a total dog. The fact he played most of this last season in college with this torn labrum, I think says a lot about his tenacity. And it's interesting to me that that's the year that he shot extremely well while he has a torn labrum, given it's not his shooting shoulder. But I think that there's a lot there. Real quick on the 2K thing, for what it's worth, the 2K stat site, if it is accurate, said that the fastest player in the league is Devin Carter, apparently.
Wow.
And the second fastest was De'Aaron Fox. So that was random as heck.
We need to line it up. We need to see a race.
He is athletic as heck, though. He had, I believe it was the exact same vertical as Malik Monk at the combine. And everybody knows Malik has crazy bounce. So this guy's a great athlete, and I think does it on both ends of the floor. It's kind of funny to me that the question was, there were talks, I forget if it was rumors or actually straight up reported, that the Kings had offered 13 for Alex Caruso. And I think that, getting Devin Carter there, that's ideally the kind of player that he becomes in my mind. So I think that if he gets a chance to play, that he's somebody I could see as a potential X factor. Hunter, you mentioned on the last episode a different guy, I think, for the most surprising player or potential to outperform expectations, I think is the way we worded it. If you know what I'm talking about, I think it'd be cool for you to share, because it was a little bit of a different direction than I think I've heard from most people.
Yeah, I think the most surprising, right? This was my dark horse.
I think it was the most likely to outperform expectations was the wording.
Okay, and it was Jaylen?
Yes.
Is that okay? Yeah. So I initially, when he was signed, I think I probably was, again, more optimistic than most. I don't think he'll necessarily be definitely not expecting him to be a starter or sixth, seventh man, but potentially in spot minutes, he could sometimes show just similarities to his brother, and he's not Jaden. I wouldn't say he's as good or on either end of the floor, but given a stable opportunity, I know he was in Charlotte for a bit. He was in Philly briefly, and so these were stints where he was kind of just trying to fit in. Um, and now the Kings are trading for him. They're a pretty stable organization, I would say at this point. They've been going pretty strong for a few years now, and so between having a competent front office in um, Monty and Wes, who have studied him enough to bring him in, and Mike, who is I'll always give him his credit and flowers for being just smart with how he utilizes guys and brings different things out of them that previous coaches may not have. And so that could be a situation where Jalen pans out better than people expected. And I think by this point in his career too, he's bounced around enough to know, like, if it doesn't work here, it could be potentially overseas, out of the league in a couple years. So I would expect a real sense of urgency from him.
Yeah, you go ahead. You go ahead.
I think it'll be interesting to say. We clearly have a bunch to say about Jaylen McDaniels. I think that it will be interesting though, because like we talk about the positions and people are like, oh, the Kings have a bunch of guards. I don't disagree. Obviously, I think that a lot of those guards are going to end up playing the 1 through 3, really. But Jaylen is the kind of guy that fits the build, like the prototype of what the Kings sort of need. And if it were able to be some progress there, some growth, and he is able to work out, like that is super ideal for this Kings team. I think defensively, that length, the size that he has, I think the 3 ball needs to go down at a little bit better rate than it has, but it's been spot minutes. So if that can get a little bit more of a rhythm, Mike Brown's a guy that he always says one of the main things he learned from Steve Kerr is to give everybody minutes at some point, keeps them engaged, whether that just be in their workouts, and just know like at some point you're going to get a chance. And if you take advantage of it, you're going to stay in the lineup. And Keon Ellis, prime example of that, I think. So it'll be interesting to see if Jaylen can sort of fit into that as well. But with that sort of logjam of guards, wings, whatever you want to call it, who do you see kind of being stuck on the outside a little bit and having less minutes coming into this year, Frank?
Right now, as things stand, I mean, I think when you look at those guys, your front two, I mean, De'Aaron and Keon, I think Keon has deserved his chance to start and play. And I think the easy answer right now is to say, we've talked about how Kevin Huerter is going to be an X factor, but I also think that he's someone that's going to have to earn it. He's someone that's going to have to come in and improve it. He deserves to see the floor more, because right now, I don't really know what case you can make that Kevin Huerter deserves to play more minutes than Malik Monk or Keon Ellis. Definitely not De'Aaron Fox. Jordan McLaughlin, sure, but it just depends on Mike Brown wants to work their rotation. But another easy answer, I was kind of looking at it, and someone who I really was a fan of coming into last year and in some stretch minutes last year at the beginning when Fox missed some time with his ankle injury, Colby Jones is someone who did fit that mold of a player the Kings needed, a 6'4", 6'5" guard with a decent wingspan, a strong defender, a guy who can shoot the 3 ball. He looked pretty bad in Summer League. He did look pretty lost, couldn't really find his footing as someone that could, be a distributor, someone who could create his own offense. So I'm intrigued to see what Mike in that coaching staff can do with him this year. But just to kind of add on to that discussion, like you were talking about with McDaniels, with Jaylen, I think that I've tried to talk myself into the possibility of him being someone that can help the Kings this year, because when you look at the roster, the way it's constructed right now, like you said, Brenden, it's guard heavy. It's very, very guard heavy. The Kings, by all means, will need, whether it's someone they sign in training camp or someone they have on the roster already, like a Jaylen McDaniels, or someone to trade for, they're going to need some help in the front court. And I think that when you look at the slim pickings they have, and they brought in someone like Terry Taylor, who has some time in Chicago, 6'5", kind of a bulkier wing. He has a 6'11" wingspan, which for reference is longer than Domantas Sabonis' wingspan and Keegan Murray's wingspan. will they go that route, or will they play, the safe card and try to build around McDaniels in that, bench unit? Because we are going to see some matchup issues. We saw them last year. How will they plug those holes? I'm trying to talk myself into it. I think last week on the lost episode, we kind of were surprised when Hunter gave that answer of McDaniels being an X factor, or being someone that you could, not an X factor, but someone that you expect more out of this year. And I'm starting to kind of look at it as a classic Kings reclamation project. Some have worked, some have not. But we saw Mike Brown do this before. I named it a couple times, Chris Duarte and the famed one, KZ Okpala. Can they find some Mo Harkless? Can they find something in this player who a lot of people have kind of written off, especially coming into the Kings? So I'm intrigued to see how that works. But again, they're very guard heavy. They're going to need to find some forward help, and maybe they have someone on the roster that already can.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely be interesting to see where Jaylen could fit in. Again, my expectation would just be kind of spot minutes. I think we're kind of all on the same page with that. I think that when like Kevin Huerter's injury kind of simplifies the starting lineup conversation. But one other thing I want to throw to you, Hunter, because Frankie and I and anybody else that ever does not mention the idea of Malik Monk starting, just totally gets, people go crazy on social media. And I get it. Malik is probably the best two guard there. But what's your thoughts on, even if you think Malik should be in that starting lineup, what's kind of your thoughts on where he fits when it comes to when the ball is thrown in the air for tip off?
If he were on a team that had a better bench, I'd say I'd feel more comfortable starting him. But I think if you swap Keon out for Malik in the starting lineup, you probably get more production, just in terms of like offensively, but then obviously you get less defensively. It's the offense may not look the same with Malik out there. So it's hard to kind of play hypotheticals that way, but I do believe if you put Keon coming off of the bench as opposed to Malik, there won't be as much of a presence felt in that second unit as far as offensive firepower, because Malik is that person. You talked about him being essentially a secondary guard and backup point guard for that group. So to me, Malik could start or come off the bench, but I would say he's just most valuable off the bench because he balances the second unit. And late in games, we saw it a ton throughout the past couple of years. He's finishing games and a part of the closing five, which I think is more important than the starting five.
For sure. I'm definitely with you. Go ahead, Frank. No, I completely agree. And even while Hunter was saying that, I was kind of thinking, where would the Kings go if let's say Mike Brown does what fans are screaming for him and puts Malik Monk in the starting lineup? What does that bench unit look like? Jordan McLaughlin, Keon Ellis, Kevin Huerter, Trey Lyles, Alex Len. I mean,
you are staggering guys, but
yeah, I'm sure. But those are the guys that are coming in to spell the stars. Yeah, of course you can keep one of Keegan, Fox, or Sabonis, which I think Mike even mentioned that going at stretches last year, or maybe going towards the plan. Mike said he wants to keep one of those three on the floor at all times because of how shorthanded the Kings were with no Malik or no Kevin. But is that enough? I mean, is that enough without having, being able to go right from Fox into Malik Monk? I think is what has made the Kings so good the past 2 years. And
right.
I think that's another conversation too. It's how much weight do you hold in that discussion of it doesn't matter how you start games, it matters how you finish them. I think that our friend here, Carmichael Dave, went on a rant here a couple weeks ago or a month ago that he's tired of the Kings getting off the slow starts and that needs to change. I partially agree with him that the Kings do need to start games off better, not to point fingers all at Kevin Huerter, but I think that the way that they defend early in games has been responsible for those lapses in defense. But I think that it just works for the formula of this team unless they acquire another talent that can be a bench presence. I think it makes too much sense to have Malik. Now, if they go get a guard that can score off the bench and score in volume, if they did have like not that he's a pure scorer, but they had a Tyus Jones type player on the bench, yeah, maybe that takes a little bit of pressure off the Kings, someone that can, score 10, 12 points per game, but that's not what this team has. So I think that Malik Monk off the bench is what makes the Kings until they're in a position where they're going to have to make a move. And we've seen a lot of injuries pop up over the past 2 years, and Mike Brown has not put Malik Monk in the starting five. So maybe that was a factor in him re-signing. I think that was something that Malik's been outspoken about too. He does want to start, but I think he also knows that this was what works for this team. But if the Kings are, 10-13 through 23 games, and Keon's shooting 32% from three, yeah, maybe they tinker with things a little bit, but I don't think we'll get to that point, and I think it'll take a little bit of a push comes to shove to get there.
Yeah, maybe there was some. Go ahead, my bad.
I was just gonna say, I think I'm interested to see how Keon does this season. I was looking up just some summer league stats, and he had about 13 points, 5 assists, and Frankie, you mentioned like 32% from three. Like that's where you wouldn't want him to be. That's where he was in summer league, and with him really being a part of other people's game plans, and people have film on him now, and you know what he does well, what he doesn't. I'm interested to see. Hopefully for him, it's a smooth transition to actually being someone people prepare for now.
It's going to be an interesting year from that aspect for sure. Like I think that last year there was times where teams are going to run him off the line a little, but he did a solid job of cutting back door, and it's just about like actually finishing those looks when you get them. What's the ball handle going to look like? I think he and Colby sort of both fall into that, and Colby even more so. Obviously, I think is maybe a step behind him. I mean, he's literally 1 year behind him and following a fairly similar trajectory, but like bringing the ball up the floor, are you going to have to change directions 3-4 times? And all of a sudden you're starting your set, the ball doesn't get to Domas's hands till 16 seconds on the clock, and right there you lost 6 seconds of your shot clock. So against good defenses makes a difference. I think that your point, Frank, of being able to go from Fox to Malik going back to that Monk conversation off the bench is really key. Like Malik has a lot of great skills, and everybody loves to see De'Aaron and Malik throw lobs to each other in transition, and they'll still get opportunities to play next to each other. But his playmaking for Malik is one of the best things that he's done for the Kings. And if he's on the floor with De'Aaron, naturally the ball's just going to be in Malik's hands a little bit less. So I think it's really about optimizing the skill set of all of these guys. And I think that the same thing could be said about Kevin and Keon Ellis. Like, those guys have less responsibility along the 4 other starters. And so it might just be the case of this is how you optimize all the talent that you have on the team. And maybe there was some sort of promise to Malik when he re-signed, and that was part of the conversation. I would doubt it though, because that probably would have happened towards the end of last season if that was something that he really was fully locked into. This needs to be the case if I'm going to come back. Like, he chose to come back, and he knows the reality of the situation. And Mike Brown said a bunch last year, it's harder to replace that starting spot, that 2 guard, than it is to replace what Malik brings off the bench. So kind of the logic that I have there, and it seems like we kind of all share when it comes to Malik coming off the bench. Be sure to talk all the crap that you want in the comments. Let us know why you think you're wrong. No hate. I appreciate the back and forth. Actually, they're definitely entertaining. But is there any sort of we got media day 6 days away now, and as somebody that likes to typically go a little bit more X's and O's related questions, it's not the easiest day to ask those sort of things. I would think you can fit in moments. Some new additions definitely make that work a little bit. And I don't know if I'm going to ask Kevin Huerter any crazy questions anymore. Like I made the mistake the first year that he came around. But is there anything specific?
He misheard you on that. That was a complete. He misheard you.
What was a crazy question?
I'm trying to remember the exact wording of it.
Who would you not? Who would you not want on the aux?
Who do you not trust on the aux?
Like an auxiliary cord. And he thought you said, "Who do I not like trust on the Hawks?"
Because he's like,
"I'm not."
Oh wow, yeah, I could see how I'd be like, "What?"
He like laughed though, but he's like, "Oh, I'm not going to answer that." Like, but then I think you told him who,
yeah,
maybe he's walked away. I don't remember, but
I was like, "What do you mean?" Like somebody else just said, like Quinn Cook, I think it was at training camp that year, and
yeah.
Like, what? I was like, on the aux, and media relations looked at me like I was crazy because apparently they heard the same thing as him. So yeah, that was an interesting one. But
so you were able to explain to him though.
Yeah, a little bit. He was like walking off, and yeah, a little bit. And I forget what his answer ended up.
Kev's like a classic like New Yorker though. He kind of just like kept it moving. He kind of just keeps it very. Kevin is pretty like I think I told you last year. He seems like much older than I think he's like 25 or 26. I'm like he seems like he's like 40 years old when he's talking. Like he's very to the point, and like I don't think I've ever heard him say or any crutch words. He just is completely calculated and knows what he's going to say at all times and just keeps it moving. So he was kind of like, huh? Oh, I can't answer that. And like kind of maybe walked off and like laughed. But it was a harmless question, man. Don't be hard on yourself.
It was a funny moment. Is he going to be in a solid mood for being a Yankees fan on media day or what?
You what?
Is he going to be in a solid mood with the Yankees on media day or what?
Yeah, I think he'll be in a great mood. If they win tonight, they win tonight, they clinch. Yeah, I'm like keeping it low here for all the Giants or A's fans that listen or watch this. But yeah, if they win tonight, they clinch a first round bye, which would be nice. So he'll probably and that would mean that they're off when we're at media day, so he'll be in a good mood.
Oh, and you as well, clearly.
Me as well. Yeah, I'll be in a great mood tonight if they win because I know I'll get a week off of having to worry about it. But any sports fans know, I'm sure you guys can like attest to it too. And if your team like has some like a playoff game or some time in between, it's kind of an agonizing wait to get to that point. Like I'd rather just get to the game and have it, happen. But yeah, Kevin should be in a good mood. Maybe ask him this year who he wouldn't trust on maybe say Bluetooth this year, since I don't know if auxiliary recorded.
There were so many people that like had never heard of the word aux. I was like, is this do people not use this term? It was whatever.
Well, they did, not to
did. That's crazy.
Not to age us, but
even
now
I call the Bluetooth the aux now though. Like it's just a term.
Well, yeah.
But I get what you're saying.
Well, but I think we're past it now. I think it's over. You're old now, dude. You're old.
That's crazy, Frankie.
Harsh realities on the pod.
Crazy. You're not old.
What are you guys hoping to get out of media day?
Hopefully some answers on the backup five. It seems like it's Alex Lynn, Trey Lyles, small ball five there, and some rim protection. I think between the amount of emphasis that Mike and there's like a trickle down effect now to De'Aaron that these people put on just perimeter defense and really like guarding the point of attack at like aggressively and all these things. To me, I would hope that there is some answer for what solution there is for rim protection, because Domas is great offensively, but we all know he struggles a bit there. So it's not really a tall team either. You hopefully would have some answers for that media day.
Yeah, I think that, those are some great things to look for too. And I think a lot of questions I have will be answered like we talked about last week, how it's that time of year where you get to walk into practice or post camp and start seeing who's wearing what jersey. If you're wearing the black jersey, usually you're the starting unit. If you're wearing the white jersey, that means you're in the second unit. So those will be fun to look at on Tuesday, Wednesday. But I think mostly for me, just kind of like from someone who's been to media days, and I think this is like my fourth or fifth one, it might sound corny, but just the vibes of the day really are. And it's they're really important to me, in my opinion, because I remember coming to those media days with Marvin Bagley and when Vlade was there. And, I don't want to keep ripping on people. The only player named is Marvin, I guess. But it goes without saying that just seeing just kind of how the general vibes are of the players and how excited they are to be there and what their goals are for the season. I think that's something that you hear kind of the arbitrary answers every year. We want to be in the playoffs. We want to be in the postseason. We want to win the finals, and down the line. But I just want to look for those answers that don't kind of mirror those and aren't the arbitrary, the worn out answers we get every year. Which ones kind of stand out and, which players have worked on what aspects of their game. Which players come into camp looking different or looking, bulkier or look like they've leaned out. I think last year, Trey Lyles showing up way leaned out from his year before was kind of a surprising storyline. And because he wanted to start playing, multiple positions, not kind of be rounded into one role. But, then obviously I think DeRozan, I think a lot of eyes are going to be on DeMar DeRozan on Monday. I think, we've seen him go on that media circuit. I'm not sure what question that hasn't been asked him can be asked on Monday, but maybe some more King-centric questions. I think a lot of those shows he went on weren't really about the Kings. They're more so about his career in the book and maybe why he chose the Kings. But it'd be interesting to see once the games start happening in practices, at least, how he feels playing with De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, Malik Monk, what he's saying. He's been around the game for such a long time and someone who's probably going to be a Hall of Famer. I just look forward to seeing what he has to say once the ball gets rolled out there. But in conclusion, for me, I'm just happy to be back in the building. And I'm sure you guys feel the same way, just to kind of get back out there. And I think we all work the best when we have actual, news to report on or write about or talk about. So I'm excited to get back in the building and just kind of see what's going on.
Yeah, I think Frank, you're the one that always uses the like school reference. Like this is first day of school. There's a last day of school with the exit interviews going into the summer and everything, and fits a little bit as I try to maintain my youth, despite Frank calling me old.
It's a joke, I know you're not old.
I know, Franklin. It's okay. It's okay.
I think I call you the baby of the station all the time because I think Emil actually is. Sorry, but you're right there.
Yeah, it's fine. I'll forgive you eventually.
What are you? 33?
Yeah, about to be. Yeah,
not as old as a local guy though.
No, yeah, getting to my Larry Bird age, so prime of my career. I'm just waiting for my Paul Pierce year. That's what we're all.
It's a big one. It's a big year.
Yeah, it's when you start wearing diapers.
Was that ever cleared up? No pun intended. Was that ever?
I mean, KG like gave him crap for no pun intended puns about it, so it made me seem like I think as a Celtics guy, even initially, I think it happened. I hate to admit
it. He's wearing white shorts because he's like, I can't get up, like I'm just covered in. How do you hide that?
It's one of the funniest moments ever, though, getting wheelchaired off and then just a couple minutes later sprinting back through the tunnel.
He's fine.
What is happening?
It's like he's all right.
You know how hype that would make the stadium? Like it would be confusion, but it's some hype to it for sure.
That was an all-time moment.
All-time moment. And by the way, I just gotta say, he is so underrated. Like he's got a bunch of stuff to him that makes him easy to pick on for sure. When Shaq gives you a nickname like the Truth, there's a reason. Is all I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
I'm not super optimistic about Media Day. I'm excited to be there, like Frank said. I'm just like, all right, what are we really gonna get here? Who's gonna say that they gained 30 pounds? Mason Jones lost some ridiculous number when we got to see him at California Classic. And so you'll get some of those. I'm interested to see like sort of progress updates on some of these injuries with Devin Carter, Kevin Huerter, see how, just first time really getting interact with Devin outside of when he first got drafted, DeRozan for sure outside of that initial presser. So kind of interested to see how some of that stuff goes. But not far away. And then we'll get to training camp. And like Frank said, I'll have the tweet ready to go with my prediction of who's in the starting jerseys while we're rocking in the tunnel before we even get into the practice facility. So we're right around the corner for sure. I want to ask you guys one sort of general NBA question before we get out of here. It's, take this how you want. We can go again with the outperforming expectations angle here, specifically when it comes to the Western Conference. What's one team you're looking at that could potentially outperform expectations when really there's 13 teams that are probably really fighting for the postseason, with maybe the Jazz and the Blazers being the two that aren't, but even the Jazz, hot start beginning of last year, still kept Lauri Markkanen around. We can start with you, Hunter. What's a sort of sleeper likely that you would think could outperform expectations in the West this year?
The first time we talked about this, I know it was not necessarily like a sleeper, and I was like, oh, OKC, I think would be my pick to come out of the West because they were so talented last season. They were able to add Isaiah Hartenstein, Alex Caruso, and essentially keep everyone. So they're stacked. But I think a sleeper, maybe I don't right off like the top of my head expect them to be too good, but the Pelicans possibly. DeJounte Murray is there now. It'll be him and CJ in the backcourt, I believe. Brenden Ingram, I guess he's hopefully for him is happy in his situation there. Not really sure. Zion, I would expect him. This man has a beard now, new tattoos. He's a new man. So hopefully he seems slimmer possibly. So if he could stay healthy, they could be a team. I wouldn't expect too many people to make too much noise, but that remains to be seen. I think there's so many variables with that team.
I'm looking at Houston. I think last year they kind of were showing late in the year that they were kind of up and coming. And obviously Ime Udoka, he obviously what happened in Boston wasn't great, but Houston, he's turned a page, and he's still a good coach. And he's making it work. I mean, and they have guys, man. I mean, in bringing in Reed Shepherd, I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do first NBA season. They have a good starting five with Van Vliet, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, causing chaos there still. Jabbar Smith Jr., Şengün. I think you're a big Şengün-y, Brenden. I was too on draft night. Really hoping the Kings would have taken him. Then they got Sabonis, and everything kind of got cleared up. But it just seems like they're one of the teams that's going to be next. They have a good young core, and they were rumored to kind of be big fish hunting this offseason, but nothing really came to fruition for them. But that doesn't mean it can't happen down the line. I think they have some draft capital to play with and some flexibility there. So I'm looking at Houston. And then one more team I'm thinking that might be in the mix. I don't know, man. I think I'm just looking at Houston right now. I think that the West is pretty set.
Love with the Warriors.
No, if we're talking about teams that aren't
so funny.
I'm
forgot about that.
I'm pretty low on the Warriors. I mean, if we're gonna talk about teams that I'm not expecting, I'm pretty low on the Warriors. I think that from the standpoint of Steph and Curry, if Steph's playing, they can beat you any night. But if by some chance, Steph, who has had some injury issues pop up in the past, gonna be 36 years old this year, if he has to miss a stretch of 15 to 20 games, I mean, I think that they're just gonna be done. Like, I just think it's over. So I'm low on the Warriors. Every year I say I'm low on the Lakers, and I think I've looked right pretty much most years. They made that conference finals run, but got swept by Denver. But I'm pretty low on them. They didn't make any moves to get better, really. I mean, they're kind of going to bank on just the LeBron and AD factor, which if those guys are healthy, yeah, they can beat you any night. But I don't know. I think the Warriors and Lakers are kind of like on their, like, it's like a last hurrah for both of them, in my opinion. And we'll kind of see if they can, one of them can come out and make the playoffs.
Yeah, they're going to be part of every trade rumor ever throughout the season. Yeah.
Why do teams keep I don't understand why teams keep helping the Lakers, though. Teams have it seems like they've gone out of their way to help them with the Vanderbilt trade and down the line. Like, I just don't get it. So Danny Ainge will probably pick up the phone and, can't trade. I don't think you can trade Lauri Markkanen this year, but maybe next year you'll just send him.
He'll sign Boogie or something.
Yeah.
Can I add one more?
Yeah.
Oh, shouts out Boogie Ellis. That's Trojan SC.
That's right. Fight on.
There's three of them.
Fight on, baby. Oh, yeah. They have DeMar, Boogie.
Jordan McLaughlin.
Oh, yeah. Shouts out. And there's actually one. I hope I'm not, like, stepping on your take here, Brenden, if you have one.
You're good.
But the Grizzlies, for sure. Shouts out to D-Rose. I believe he's he's getting waived. I don't know what his next step is, but
riding off in the sunset.
Yeah. So seeing Ja back, Jaren Jackson played last year, but some of last year, but of course there was essentially a G League team, respectfully around him, and you get Zach Edey, who could. I'm interested to see how that pans out with him being in the league against much stiffer competition. Desmond Bane was essentially their go-to guy for most of last season before he was hurt. Marcus Smart, we can't forget that he won. As your guy, Brenden, I know you're already locked in, but Depoy, 5 years within the last 5 years, I would say. So they're stacked as well. I think they have a lot of young guys now, Gigi Jackson, Scottie Pippen, who were able to get experience with really no expectations. It was low risk, kind of high reward there with them. And now they could potentially grow up and be rotation pieces. Jake LaRavia, I think they have the makings of a team that could definitely get out of the first round and potentially make more noise than that.
Yeah, I think that's a good shot. I think Vince Williams Jr. kind of came into his own last year as a solid guy.
Great fantasy streamer.
Great. Yeah. Sure. I was going to say he did everything in fantasy last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good shout because I'm about to have my draft here. I would think coming up. Actually, I need to follow up with
all those names. Big Miami Heat of the Western Conference vibes from Memphis. Kind of finding guys that kind of plug and play and good system guys. So yeah, I think that Memphis is a good shout. I kind of want a footnote with how John Morant hasn't really been, John Morant for over a year now. He only played I think 9 or 10 games last year. So good shout.
We're not far removed from them being the 1 seed in the West, really.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty similar lineup. I think Dylan Brooks from Marcus Smart is like an interesting trade between the two. Just less shooting. The one thing for Marcus, he's going to get some threes up for sure, and they're not always going to be the prettiest or shots that you love the most. And I do think that Edey fits that Steven Adams role pretty well, and I would guess seamlessly. But to Frank's point of Houston, that's where Steven Adams is at now. And I think Reed Shepherd probably my pick for rookie of the year. He was just totally balling out. And we'll see what the sort of minutes may look like. But balled out in summer league, shoots ridiculously well. I mean, like their bench lineup has likely those two guys, Reed Shepherd, Steven Adams. And then we're talking Tari Eason, Cam Whitmore, and maybe a Men Thompson is there. It's like they have a pretty deep team. Maybe it's Jayshawn Tate if Thompson is in that starting spot, like he probably is. So they're interesting. And I would say, I think I'm going the Spurs though. Like I think getting CP3 is a perfect fit, not just for Wemby, but for Pop to kind of just be able to run the ship there. They tried to run Sohan at point last year. I think it's good to get him to expand his game a little bit. I would imagine that'll be beneficial long term. That's obviously not exactly where you want to run him. We'll see how much CP is actually able to play. We know what Wemby is. I think that he could end up being the face of the league. This guy's absolutely ridiculous on both ends of the floor. I think he was runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year in his first year. We know what he does from three. Like everybody talks about that game from Steph, obviously, in that final or the gold medal game in the Olympics. Wemby was hitting some insane shots to keep France in that game and force Steph to kind of do what he eventually did there. But that, I think, as much as we've seen Harrison Barnes, there is a veteran presence there, and he just does a little bit of everything. I think that's somebody that they needed. I'm also really big on Devin Vassell. I think that he has some off the dribble game that could be intriguing. I believe he's going into year 4, I believe it is. He's in the Tyrese draft, if I'm remembering that right, one pick after him.
Yep.
So I think that there could be a big step there. Now, I think that I'm probably talking about like fighting for play-in, really. But that would be my one. And then the other thing, like, again, on the last episode, we kind of predicted who we think would win the West. And Hunter, you mentioned OKC. Frankie and I actually both picked Phoenix. And, I think that it's just easy to forget about these teams. I also preface on the last one and will again that I'm also a guy that picked the Clippers a few times to probably come out of the West when they had their 2 stars, for what it's worth. But like you look at that talent, and while Booker is a great playmaker, and I think that fit that point guard role okay for them last year, you just went out and got Tyus Jones and Monte Morris, and those two guys are like the kings of assist to turnover. Just facilitate everything, make sure everybody gets their touches. If Nurkic is healthy, and I know health is going to be a big question for that team in general, Beal is the funky fit to me. I think if that wasn't the case, it could be a little bit more well-rounded if you kind of spread the wealth a little bit there. But I kind of like what they have. Royce O'Neal, I believe, still went back there, so they're interesting to me. And the one other team I'll shout is kind of Dallas. Less so for the Clay thing, I will say. I'm interested to see how Clay works, because Clay is so used to this Golden State offense where there's constant ball and player movement, and it's like polar opposite in Dallas. You're not necessarily just watching Luka, but there's going to be some possessions where that happens. Now he's in contention for MVP every year like he should be, so I get it. But I actually think Quentin Grimes and Najee Marshall are 2 really big gets for them. I think Najee Marshall essentially fits that Derrick Jones Jr. role pretty seamlessly in my mind. And I really like Quentin Grimes. He seems like a guy that in New York, like Tibbs, play that guy a ridiculous amount of minutes, until Miles McBride's kind of comes into his own. So interested to see what goes on there. But in general, like, this is a West that, I mean, we just named a bunch of teams, and this isn't even really like the top 4 that we've talked about, so it's going to be competitive. And ultimately, like, the Kings are going to have tough things to deal with more often than not. And we saw a bunch of games last year where Charlotte, Portland, Houston, and just like blowing all these games where you got to be locked in and night out. And I think that's part of the thing that helps with the addition of DeMar, is that if something's not clicking, like, all right, DeMar, like, go, let's regain composure of this game a little bit here. So I think that's all we got for you guys here. I ran for a little bit longer than expected, as tends to always be the case here. But any sort of final thoughts or questions or anything before we get out of here, Frank?
Please don't erase this.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Please don't erase it. No.
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, Hunter's like, all right.
I did make sure to log in before this and delete all the previous stuff before we did this recording.
Beautiful.
So.
No, man, I'm excited. I think last week was a good warm up, and this was the real deal. And now the next time we hop on here, there'll be actually things to talk about. So I'm excited to get back in the building and kind of see what the players have been up to, the coaches have been up to, and what our fellow media members have been up to. And let's get after it. And Hunter, also, I wanted to, if I'm not going to talk again, Hunter, thank you again for coming on, man. And I promise you, this one will make it.
I'm glad. Yeah, same for me. Essentially, it's just good to be around that time of year where NBA basketball is back. Shouts out to W holding us down right now with the postseason, but it's always just a great time. I think I've also referred to the first game as kind of the first day of school, and so I'm excited to see how this team progresses and gels together with DeMar.
For sure. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. Excited for all the, sort of tongue-in-cheek reportings of like, I don't know, guys, the vibes are pretty good at media day. This might be one of those type of years.
It's going to be special. It's going to be special.
Yep. They're adding another beam, or who knows.
What if they did that, though? What if opening night happens and then there's just like they add a beam for each win? Because someone had that idea, too, a while back. And it's like that'd be, if they play the way they've been playing, that's going to be pretty expensive bill there. But
TSA guidelines would hate them. They'd be like,
yeah,
what's going on here?
Yeah. One's enough.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, appreciate everybody listening. Definitely be sure to subscribe on any sort of listening platforms to stay up to date with any future episodes. You can check out Frankie and mine's work at sactownsports.com, and this will be up on the Sactown Sports YouTube as well. Hunter Patterson does great work, like I said, for The Athletic as well, covering the Kings and doing a handful of other things for them there as well. At Hunt Patterson _ on Twitter. For Frank, at F Cartoscelli 3 on Twitter, and at Brenden Nunes NBA on Twitter for myself. Appreciate comments, feedback, anything like that. Yell at us for our Malik Monk takes in the comments. Appreciate everybody listening, and media day right around the corner. So have some exciting coverage for you coming up this season. Thanks, and hear from us again in the next week or so.